Adrian Reynolds. Hello. You are currently Director of Ministry at the Proclamation Trust.
That's right.
From Easter 2017, though, you're going to be taking over as the FIEC Director of Training. So it'd be great to get to know you a little bit and find out a little bit more about your early thoughts on that. Tell us, first of all, just sketch in for us perhaps your early Christian life and what part discipleship and training played in that.
Okay. Well, I was converted on a Crusader camp. The same day that Charles and Diana got married.
Okay.
So we watched the royal wedding in the afternoon and I was converted in the evening. And a friend had taken me along. He told me it was an outward bound camp. I thought it was, my parents thought it was, but it turned out to be a Christian camp. And I was converted.
With any outward bound activity at all?
Not much.
Okay.
Not much. I think we played Hunt the Leader somewhere, as you do on Christian camps. And they're wonderfully converted from a non-Christian household. And then really discipled in the Crusader movement by a godly couple who would become my in-laws.
Okay.
I thought I ought to marry their daughter.
The least you could do.
Indeed. And then went away to university. That was the first time I really was in a decent church and heard preaching for the first time. It just captivated me, really. A guy called Richard Cooper, who I still remember, preached my first sermon there on the whole of Habakkuk.
Okay.
Because you can.
Why not?
And then after university, got married, moved to Harpenden in an FIEC church there, and worked in the city. Then moved to Bracknell, was in an FIEC church there, and then became a pastor and moved to a Grace Baptist Church in Hampshire, which is just down the road from Bracknell. So that's kind of my sort of very brief history. In terms of training, not a lot along the way, bits and pieces here and there. I was taken along to the EMA in 1994 by my pastor, who obviously saw some potential in me, or just wanted someone to come with, I guess. So that was my first EMA, and I'd often been thinking about ministry, but it wasn't until about 1999, I guess, that seriously that sort of entered onto the horizon.
Okay.
In terms of training, we didn't have any money, the church didn't have any money, and so we looked at a few theological college options, but they weren't viable for us at the time. So I did some distance learning, I went to Cornhill, and I found a retired pastor at whose feet I sat for 3 years, my Gamaliel, really.
Okay.
And who taught me languages and all kinds of theology and stuff. So slightly quirky training, but very useful. I read a lot, and I don't have any regrets looking back at it. And served in a Baptist church in Hampshire for about 9 years before coming to London to work for the Proclamation Trust.
Okay, lovely. The benefits of that one-on-one time with that older mentor?
Well, clearly intensity is good, and access to someone with a large brain. There are downsides too. Obviously, I miss the student interaction. He was in his late 70s, early 80s, but was always thinking through new stuff. So it was quite nice. It wasn't a kind of, this is my settled position on whatever subject it was. So there was a bit of toing and froing that you would get in a student body, but not quite the same as being amongst a group of students. To a certain extent, I got that through Cornhill, but I did miss out on that. But that was the way it was for us.
Okay. And then, as you've been involved in ministry, obviously we know you as Director of Ministry here, very involved in supporting pastors. Just in your own ministries, how much has training been a part of what you've set out to do and be involved in?
Well, always at the core, really. I've always wanted to be training guys for ministry and always been involved in training initiatives. So actually, almost as soon as I became a pastor, I came back to London, worked with Friends International and the Philip Project, training overseas guys, and have been involved with various training initiatives through that and through PT. Actually, I'd had some involvement with PT before I came here, but also within the church, trying to see a generation of people raised up for leadership, and also trying to get lay leaders trained. One of the things about the church that I was in, there weren't a lot of young people, but there were a good established number of elders, and trying to encourage them to learn and to grow has always been really a core of the ministry.
Fantastic. I've heard you talk about training and comparing it to the Olympics in some way. I'm imagining podiums, medals, everything televised.
I think we need all of that,
okay,
don't we? The thing I love about the Olympics is this sort of pursuit of excellence all the time and trying to push the boundaries all the time. So, just because someone has jumped 8.5 metres before, don't settle for that, let's push it 8.75, 8.8 and so on. And the whole motto of the Olympics, faster, higher, stronger, I think there's something in that for training. I think the way we tend to think about training is very static at the moment. So we tend to say, well, let's get a lump of training at the beginning of ministry, get to a certain standard, and then you've made it. Of course, you get more experience as you go on. But it's interesting the way Paul speaks to Timothy He talks to him both in terms of gifting and in terms of godliness, that he should let people see his progress. So I think the key word really for training, ongoing training in ministry, is progress, that people should be growing. And I think what we tend to do is we tend to sort of see a big jump at the beginning and then it's static. I'd like to see it much more of a continuation, and for people to think about, as often folk do in the business world, a lifelong training programme really for those in ministry.
Fantastic. You've also spoken a little bit about breadth within training. It'd be interesting just to hear your thoughts on how the nature of independent ministry, where often you have a pastor but also other elders leading the church, how does that shape the sort of training that we ought to be thinking about?
I think there's an argument for saying at the moment that much of our training doesn't actually mirror our ecclesiological models. So we believe, many of us, in a plurality of elders, and our churches are structured like that. And yet we tend to invest in one person or maybe two people on the church staff or leadership who kind of have all the training in them. And I can see the benefits of that and the usefulness of it. You can't send 10 lay leaders off to college for 3 years, for example. Nevertheless, I think in our churches, a lot of leadership is done by people who have no training whatsoever. And it seems to me that's an omission. Now, there are obviously some good exceptions, churches that are working hard to train leaders across the board, but I think we need to embrace that even more. I mean, for example, the church I was in, I was the only full-time member of staff, and probably 30% of the preaching would be done by the ladies of the church without any training whatsoever. So I tried to give them some training and some help, but actually that's the culture we need to have for all our leaders in churches, and we need to find ways to deliver appropriate training for all kinds of people in churches, not just the minister.
Brilliant, thank you very much.